Welcome everyone. Welcome to the second video of our training that is called Permaculture and Social Permaculture and Mental Health. My name is Kinga. I'm co-founder of Hekate Conscious Aging Foundation and one of the trainers of this course. And as I mentioned in the first video, this is the second video and the preliminary educational material for the course. And in this video, we are going to focus on mental health and conscious aging based on social permaculture. More specifically, in this second video, we are going to talk about the wider social context in which we work and the way we see the wider social context that we live in. So it's going to be kind of an interpretation or a perception of our current social and environmental realities, how we see it. And just like the first and the third video, this one is also going to be used to refer to during the course. So why are we here? Of course, this teaching material and training has been developed in Erasmus project called Social Peace, as we mentioned in the first video. So, of course, this is one of the reasons why we are here, but perhaps even more importantly, we are here because what we see, what we experience ourselves, and probably many of us who see this video, that there are many struggling communities. We are surrounded by all kinds of crises, for example, the climate crisis, the care crisis, the mental health crisis, the housing crisis. Europe is aging and we ourselves are aging. We experience an ecosystem collapse currently happening on Earth. One can argue that we also experience a social collapse with all kinds of issues that I'm not going to into details here. I'm just raising the topics, and also one might say that there are all kinds of social and structural illnesses in our societies. Also, as it was mentioned in the first video, if we think about our society that has kind of serious structural problems and illnesses, can we just say that it's quite normal or healthy to feel mentally ill in an ill society? Is it perhaps a quite healthy mental reaction to the wider social context we live in? And if it is, what do we do about it? I'd like to mention here the deep adaptation movement, which is not really the focus of our training. And we are not going into details about deep adaptation, but I'd like to mention this as a new movement, relatively new movement. And we pretty much agree with what they are saying in the sense that we need to rethink how we think about the changes around us and what kind of answers we give to these circumstances, let's say. So what they say is that we have to change our mind a little bit and be more realistic about what can be achieved and what cannot be achieved in terms of sustainability. And I strongly recommend to everyone to read a little bit more about deep adaptation. I think it's very inspirational. And also there is the permaculture movement and the permaculture narrative. that we are going to use a lot, obviously, in this course and in our thinking in relation to how we are in a society, also from a mental health perspective, and what can we do based on permaculture. So basically, the reason why we are here is to find answers to all these issues, to make certain decisions on an individual level, but also community levels and like mental health spaces related decisions as well. And very importantly, to take actions. So this course is really about taking actions. As it was mentioned in the first video, we are trying to work together with community leaders, mental health experts, permaculturists, social workers, who are actually willing to take actions to support their own communities or clients in their mental health issues and problems and solutions, and how permaculture can be used not just theoretically, but also in actions. This slide is a repetition from the first video, but I think it's important to have a look at it again. We are talking about health, harmony, mental health. We're trying to support our clients and communities in relation to their mental health. So how do we see the world around us? On individual, family, society, community levels, and also in nature as a whole, there are loads of things, issues, as it was mentioned before. So the question is, how do we maintain our mental health, or how do we heal from mental health issues when there are really such serious issues around us? Just a little list of what kind of coping mechanisms we can see. It's not a complete list, of course, but just to give you an idea of how different and quite understandable coping mechanisms there are among people when they are facing mental health issues in relation to our current society. There is denial, belittling the problems, being positive, and you know, when you just have to be positive and not face the problems. There are symbolic responses and actions. And there are also, there are many coping mechanisms, but as I mentioned also, there is the deep adaptation movement, very interesting. There are people and communities thinking about systematic responses. There is a growing debate about solidarity economy and solidarity-based communities. And also the permaculture-based conscious holistic actions that we are focusing ourselves as well. So in our thinking, we use the model developed by Deborah Fries and her colleagues. And there is a very interesting TED talk that we sent by now, probably sent to you as well, but you will also find it in the material for this training. And we really strongly recommend you to watch this TED talk by Deborah Fries. The title is How I Became a Localist. You will see it on YouTube and on TED as well. And her model says something very interesting about how living systems change. And I'm not going into very big details because you can see her talking about this very precisely in her TED talk. But for the sake of this video, she's saying that organic systems and living systems grow, reach their peak, and then they decline. And the way new systems are developed, maybe, is that they emerge. There is this emergence in living systems where things start to appear, and when they start connecting and get stronger, they become the structures of a new system or the new system. And when they become strong enough, they will just eventually replace the old systems. Have a look at the TED Talk. That's very inspiring and also very interesting. And we use this kind of change model in our thinking as well. We'll talk about this more in a minute. So in a way, what we could see in the last couple of decades, and I'm going back to this emergence idea, is that quite a few areas and bubbles and movements and fields were working and working out their solutions or narratives or stories about what's happening in the world. I personally was involved, and it's not a complete list. I'm just listing a couple of the bubbles and spaces I was involved in the last 25 years, let's say. And my experience was that, for example, the environmental and green movements did a lot of work to respond to the wider social and environmental context. Also, the social and human rights movements were quite active, telling their stories and offering their solutions. The feminist movement these days, thankfully now, involving the care and the care crisis related dialogues. Many mental health narratives appeared. The permaculture movement was getting stronger and stronger, loads of science results, and loads of social and digital innovation happening in a way kind of separately, I would say. And this is really just my experience, and it's also up for debate how other activists and active people see these changes. But I would argue that in the last couple of years, 5 years maybe maximum 10, I would say 4, 5, 6 years, maximum 10, what I see is that these movements and bubbles and people, communities, are now somehow getting closer to one another. So actually, my experience is that these movements and achievements are now connecting with one another, creating kind of a shared narrative quite often. And for myself personally, being involved in many of these movements and bubbles, it's quite uplifting and healing in many ways to see that now we have this middle ground kind of, which I see as the backbone of this new system, where the new society that many of us are building, and my experience is that this really is getting stronger and more powerful, is kind of like a new society, a care-focused, care-based, sustainable, and regenerative society. I mean, I think it's up for debate and probably we'll discuss it in the course anyway, how you see it. Do you see it really growing? How powerful it is? How powerful it is not? what is the relation of this kind of new system to the old one? What's the relation between the old and the new? Is there a new at all? These are very interesting questions to discuss anyway, but for the sake of our training, this is the model that we use. And as this new kind of society or new kind of structure is getting stronger, there are new stories and new narratives around how we describe this new system, let's say. And as I mentioned, there's a growing discussion about deep adaptation. New generations are entering the space compared to my generation, for example, which is like middle age, 50 plus. And there are lots of talks and actions carried out by intergenerational communities and co-creation. And you also hear people talking about solidarity economy and circular economy. There are new approaches and perceptions and narratives around how we do our actions and what exactly are we doing to build these new systems. And if we now go back to the mental health scope, I think it's quite obvious and easy to understand that, you know, different people, I mean, if we accept this paradigm of change, that the old system is going into its decline and the new system is getting stronger and stronger, I think it's probably quite easy to see that depending on the individual, what the person or the community is looking at exactly, where the focuses are. For example, looking at the decline of the old system, all the troubles and issues and difficulties and struggles, this will have an impact on the mental health of the person or communities. Or if somebody is more involved in building this new society and new paradigm and seeing all the nice things happening, this will probably be a very different mental health context and a very different social context in which people will feel probably better, I would say. Again, it's a bit of a oversimplification, but I think we can use it as a model when we will go to explore how social permaculture and permaculture can help communities and individuals in their mental health. So, you know, if we are a person like this person looking at the collapse, or if we are this person being active here, and probably most of us, like myself, also is like this person looking at both actually, and just trying to feel how it feels to look at these collapsing structures and also these emerging new structures. This will bring us to mental states in which we feel better or worse. And one of the things that is very strongly believed in Hecate is that having this kind of understanding of our wider social context is a good ground or a good base for creating actions, permaculture-based actions, which will help to solve like social issues or environmental issues, but also, and in this course, more importantly, this will also offer support to mental health problems of individuals and communities as well. I would also argue that the permaculture movement is, I mean, I think that's very personal view, that these new structures are very far from replacing the old one. So it's still kind of emerging. And I would, just by heart say that these new systems are about this phase of their development. They are now much stronger than they used to be like 20 years ago, but very far from being the dominant system. And the permaculture movement is also here, I would say. A very strongly and quickly growing movement, but still far from being the dominant system. And I, as a permaculturist, very strongly believe that working with permaculture, using permaculture in either environmental or social contexts, is a good way to respond to all these social issues and environmental issues, but also a good tool and a good space to address mental health related issues. And that's what we do in the framework of this course as well. Now, a little bit about the evolution of ecology as a science. And I think it's important to reflect on that as well. So ecology used to be a rather static, hierarchic, and human-centered science. You might or might not have seen this image. It's been around for quite a few years now. And historically, ecology was focusing on the individual and the species. And as ecology evolved and is evolving even now, people started to think more about ecology, and the individuals in an ecological system is like a more complex system. Not just the individual and the species, but also their connections, their network, complex interconnected systems. Energy and matter flow, for example. And that also elements of the ecosystem have multiple functions. And also there's a growing dialogue about the intelligence, the individual level in that intelligence, and the collective intelligence of nature or even species. So there was this step between a rather ego-driven ecological approach to a more eco-driven ecological approach. And this is something that we came up with within Hecate, trying to further develop this model of the eco kind of approach, which already mentioned a more holistic approach compared to the first one. But we would like to emphasize and focus on the interconnected nature of ecosystems, and also the care element, how elements of the ecosystems actually in a way care for other elements of the systems. So if we look at ecological systems as an interconnected network, and where elements are connected with each other, with several connections, all of a sudden it becomes like a neuron network of interconnected elements in which energy and information and matter is flowing here and there. But there's a lot of connection and a lot of care. And this is how we would like to see ecosystems and ecological systems, and also human systems as well. And this is where care and connection is becoming more and more important. And it will be, of course, an important base for our mental health related thinking as well. So we like to use this model, this Keiko model where care and connections are very important in living systems. Also, you will see images now when we talk about ecology, like the web of life and all the connections of the certain elements of the ecosystems. So it's kind of mainstream, I would say, by now, to think about ecology and ecological systems as networks and, you know, interconnected systems. Now, if you remember the first video in which we addressed the permaculture models and the permaculture frameworks, this one is just a repetition, a little bit of a repetition from the first video. We discussed the permaculture ethics of permaculture, earth care, people care, fair share, the flower of permaculture, with the ethics and the design principles in the center. This is purely just repetition from the first video, just to bring the permaculture mindset to this video now. We talked a lot about the permaculture design principles here. This kind of developed flower of human needs and its focus areas. We talked a little bit about freedom and certain elements of freedom. That was another model that we mentioned in the first video, and also capital types. And the reason why I brought it in here again is, you know, just to refresh the permaculture thinking here in the second video as well, but also to connect the permaculture mindset with the ecosystem mindset that we just mentioned, this interconnected network and interconnected system, and also the social context that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, that if you look at this, this is also a lot more interconnected system now, right? So now, hopefully by now, even if you are completely new to permaculture, based on the first video and this one, you will see that the permaculture logic, the permaculture narrative, and the models that we use in permaculture, the design thinking and the way we look at systems is really quite similar to how we see ecological systems now and how we think about social change as well. We will discuss it in the training a lot more, of course, but I'd like to draw your attention and at this point to these parallels, this systematic thinking and the interconnected nature of also permaculture, ecological systems, and social change. Okay, and again, going back to the mental health logic, and this one was also mentioned in the first video, that when we deal with permaculture, when we deal with mental health, or when we deal with social change, we quite often use these terms to describe our values, our actions, the framework in which we are thinking. And if you just focus a little bit on these terms like care, connection, respect to one another, but also nature, of course, community, purpose, nature, intimacy, co-creation, consciousness. We use these terms a lot, and we not just talk about this, but these are the focus of our actions as well. And if you link it back to permaculture and mental health and the wider context, you will probably now feel also think, but also feel how relevant these terms are in the wider social change context, but also in the mental health context. And our action will be based on permaculture and social permaculture. So hopefully you will see by now the structure of how permaculture and social permaculture can be like a really pragmatic tool to tackle mental health and social change as well, and actually create social change or create a better world in a way which by definition probably have the quality of supporting mental health of the participating individuals and communities. So in a way, our aim with this program is to become more conscious about the role of permaculture in our own life, in our own aging process, in our own social role, to become more skilled and conscious as helpers in our communities, being social workers or therapists or permaculturists or teachers, trainers, whoever we are, to become more conscious as humans towards nature. And a very important aim of our organization, because it's still a relatively new approach, is to create and nurture the international space and community of permaculturists and mental health supporters to cooperate, co-create, and learn from each other. So as a summary for this video, the society is changing, a new system the new system is getting stronger, or maybe we could also say the new systems are getting stronger, depending on our focus. There's a lot of knowledge about permaculture and a growing knowledge about social permaculture. Many permaculturists are active as community helpers, healers, carers as well. Not, permaculture is not only, as we mentioned in the first video, is not only about producing food anymore, by far. Also, many mental health helpers, therapists, or social workers use nature in their work already. So what we want to do is work out individual solutions of our participants in the training, how to use the permaculture mindset, the ethics, and the design principles in non-garden setups to support communities. So our training is focusing on that mostly. So how can we support, as participants of the training, helpers, therapists, social workers, teachers, etc. How can we support our own clients and communities in their mental health? Also pragmatic community management and care. And I'd like to just emphasize again the ethics of permaculture, people care, earth care, and fair share. So how do we do about this? And of course, we'll talk a lot about this during the training. So this is about the end of the second video. We talked about a wider social context and the way we look at it, or the way we interpret it, our current realities. And in the first video, you will see, and you probably saw, or hopefully saw already, the permaculture details. So in this video, we talked about the social context. And in the third video, we'll go into more details on how social permaculture can be used as tool to create actions for ourselves in our own practice or in our own communities. So thank you for your time and attention, and see you in the third video. Bye for now.